A returning veteran who's made her place in most libraries and rosters relatively consistent, it is SPN00 Float Spinner, with a kit of melee trap, anti-air, anti-sea, float legs, and the leg ability of emergency, which buffs the mobility of the bot when a part on self is broken from attack or any other kind of damage. Now, unfortunately, because she has anti-air and anti-sea and a setup-based trap, Float Spinner's, the overall viability on the field is going to be very, very low because she is very conditional in what she does. However, in the few cases where she is useful, she can make use of very high damage output in those specific senses. Melee Trap is a setup-based skill, as I mentioned. Basically, it'll set a plant on the field where if any target or opponent uses a melee-based skill, this includes sword, hammer, beam sword, any kind of melee skill in general, it will passively damage them for a set number of times before the trap itself expires and leaves the field. Of course, being a head skill, Float Spinner can of course reset it to keep that passive aggression going, but of course its damage will not be super high, unfortunately. Anti-air is a standard shooting attack essentially in this case. However, in the rare sense where it is used, and you are fighting an opponent that uses flight-based legs, you get a ×7 damage bonus to the attack and to the anti-air attack, which very quickly and very easily will cripple just about any kind of flight-based bot very quickly, very easily, and more or less give you the fight hand over foot. Same case with anti-sea with sea-based opponents essentially. So while by herself, Float Spinner at base and no conditions is not very handy, in the few cases where she absolutely will dominate. The float legs, of course, give her very solid terrain match across the board, A rank and of course S rank on Cyber, but the emergency leg ability I feel is kind of weird on her, because it requires, in order for it to kick in, it requires her to have a part broken, which generally, unless you're using something like Sacrifice, is something you really don't want to do. So in this case, the leg ability is kind of wasted more or less, but in rare instances, it probably could be seen as like a backup plan, hence the name Emergency in this case. As a pure set score, I would rate her particularly on the lower end of the scale at about a 4.5 out of 10, probably even a 5, only in the case where her parts are considered viable. But across the board on any other condition, pretty solid 4 or 4.5 for the reasons stated above. She is very niche, very conditional, and dedicated fighting is not something that she is built for. As mixed parts, on the other hand, for the reasons stated above, in the few instances where she can be made useful, she will absolutely dominate. So if you're fighting on terrain or fighting an EX trial, for instance, that is going against a sea-based or a flight-based opponent, this would be her time to shine. But in any other condition, I would actively encourage using parts from other bots much faster and much sooner before I would consider using Float Spinner in this case. Her legs, however, probably could be a little bit of a forgiveness and a saving grace, because you probably could make use of that emergency leg ability relatively easily if you pair it off with the right parts. Say, for instance, in this case, Anzudo Beetle with the Sacrifice on her arms. You could probably make use of it then, as a Sacrifice basically forces a part to break and basically guarantees you that passive mobile boost upon use. And then, of course, you can restore it if you wish to get yourself yet another speed boost, and maybe even abuse that back and forth over the course of several turns.